I hate colorism in Asia. And white doesn't mean it's better. There's a lot of colonialist mindset, Stu. Incorporate with also that tradition of white means better, but in the royalties. So in our heads, some people think white people are better because they have white skin and they're rich. And so it has internalized this kind of shame that we're not as good enough. Shut the fuck up. If you think about it, it's irrational. Race theory was invented as a social construct to put certain people on top to oppress the other, and also incorporate laws and fair terms to put other people down so they can keep oppressing them, while benefiting certain groups and to create division.
Why is it so hard to find a body lotion that isn't for whitening or brightening? All the options are just screaming, whiten your skin, brighten it. Say no to dullness and darkness.
Let me say that again. The whole history of America is the history of rich white men telling not rich white people that their enemies are black and brown. It starts in the colonies.
And what do you say about white supremacy today?
Part of what I say is that white supremacy, first of all, isn't a white thing. It's part of this culture. It's part of how all of us have been taught to think about difference. Who's better, who's inferior, who's superior. I prefer white supremacy to racism precisely because it says that we're all being socialized to think along certain dualistic lines, and that the notion of that which is light or white being better, that which is dark or black being worse, bad, inferior, is something that everyone in the culture is socialized to think.
I'm a U.S. Army combat veteran. It was while serving in the U.S. Army that I was first introduced to the science of psychological warfare. The U.S. military calls it PSYOPs, which is an acronym used for psychological operations. It was then that I began to gain a clear and accurate understanding of how the white society now covertly continues its control and subjugation of black people. They merely develop more sophisticated covert ways that allows them to continue doing so without any black resistance. One of the manuals stated that the most effective way to control and subdue a large targeted population without having to actually physically fight them is by bombarding them with propaganda that misleads them to believe that their core problem lies within themselves.
System malfunction.
Been by the code, you know how I be. I am a product of putting my curses to rest on my family tree. Can see growth, they tell me they free, but they work for the man. I can't relate, I did it on my own.
System malfunction.
What is happening, YouTube? It's Download Malfunction, the one-stop shop for all the madness and the dysfunction that takes place in our crumbling society. It's clear that the world is in an unhealthy place. Although it's unfortunate, I find a little solace in knowing that I'm not alone in this uncertainty, discomfort, and fear, trying my best to survive, just like you in the belly of the beast, terrified, dazed, and confused, which is more than enough to take a few years off one's life. But in the midst of the madness, I hope this post finds you well, and I am always extremely grateful for your engagement around these topics. As you can tell by the thumbnail and the title, White Supremacy, this is a topic that I've always partook in, but it's always been in bits and pieces, such as racism, disparities in education, housing, civil rights, Jim Crow, quote-unquote illegal aliens, the military-industrial complex, indigenous land grabs. Based on what I can see, this list is a never-ending list. It doesn't matter where you go on this planet, you will always be able to find this white supremacy ideology extremely healthy and thriving because it feeds on a healthy dose of propaganda that is regularly injected into our psyches with every move and every turn that we make. So in this post, I'm gonna give my take on this from a high-level overview based on, once again, my perspective and how I see it. And in the next week or so, the plans are to do a live show around this same topic where we can discuss parts of it in more detail. And if you want to be a part of the discussion, make sure that you subscribe to the channel so that when the notification goes out, You won't miss it, and I'll be more than happy to have you join the panel to share your thoughts and sentiments around this. And I'm gonna make it easy for you to be able to recognize this live, because the same exact thumbnail that you see here is what you'll be looking for. The only difference is that there will be a logo on that thumbnail that says live show or live. So I'll go ahead and pause right here to give you a little bit of time to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and if you find the content favorable, please do leave a comment and share this out to your community. And again, I thank you for that. Now, before we get into it, I wanted to clean up a few things or to provide some clarity around this topic of white supremacy. First off, deep down in me, I believe that white people themselves are not racist people. I am convinced that this is not an inherent trait in anybody. And on the flip side, I don't think black people have a hatred for white people. And you can see these examples in young kids in how they interact and play with each other prior to their minds being poisoned by the media and all the other poisonous sensorial elements that they come in contact with as they grow into adulthood. What I do believe is that we are all subjects to this game of chess, and we are just mere pawns being utilized on this board, which should be called the game of divide and conquer, where the benefits are realized by a small, minute portion of the population. Because as we know, capitalism is the big brother that utilizes the ideology and systems of white supremacy in order to maintain its steady heartbeat. I've spent decades pondering over this concept of white supremacy, and I've always wondered what the world would look like without this filter over it. And I always wonder, would our existence look different if, say, Africans acquired gunpowder or guns and armaments the same way the Europeans did? Because I know people argue that it's only Europeans that have this thirst for dominance and control. But based on the little that we do know about history, at least the amount that they allow us to have access to, there has always been wars and always been other peoples coming into other people's lands, taking what they have, subjugating them, and imposing their cultural norms and standards on that population. So this is nothing new. It just so happens that it's a Eurocentric time to shine. And whenever you're not in power, you seem to have all of the arguments and complaints around how and why the dominant incumbent is doing things the way that they do them. Let's just step back for a second. And because I do this often, where if I'm ever up in the woods in a very serene place, my mind always thinks back to the indigenous people and how they would have lived here on the planet. My imagination sees them sitting alongside the riverbanks, enjoying their communal organizations. The men are hunting, the women are taking care of the families, they're protecting each other. Now, I'm not saying that the world was devoid of any problems back then, because I said earlier, there's always been complications amongst peoples the world over. But I always use my imagination and just see these people sitting amongst the trees, enjoying their lives, paying all the respects to Mother Earth. I challenge you to imagine a world where one isn't judged because his skin hue is 4 shades darker than someone else. Or imagine a world where everyone is treated equally based on who you are as another human, and everyone sees you as another brother or another sister, and they do all that they can to look after you and to make sure that your well-being is taken care of. Imagine a world where you don't have to get up in the wee hours of the night to find a babysitter to take care of your child so that you can go run out and hustle on a 9 to 5 that's going to lead you extremely exhausted at the end of the day, where you don't have any time to enjoy your family. I challenge you to imagine a world where you're not full of all this stress, where you can't pay your bills just to be able to live. And I challenge you to imagine everyone who is on this planet as part of one collective community, where you can walk outside of your house at night and not have to worry about someone trying to take from you. All in all, I think this is the vision that most people would want for their lives. And I know what's holding that back is white supremacy.
Well, the West needs to stop creating asylum seekers then. Stop destroying people's houses and then wondering why they're moving. Stop stealing minerals out of countries so there's no way for them to function. Stop assassinating leaders when they talk about new political systems that can actually support the residents of the country. Stop using technology to influence elections. Stop getting involved in modern day slavery. Leave people alone.
I don't think reparations for something that happened 150 years ago for whom none of us currently live.
In 63 BCE, the Romans took over, right? There's a certain someone who was taken off the map until 1948, right? We talking about 2,000 years later, roughly, give or take, I don't know. 2,000 years. Not only did you provide them what could only be called reparations, among many other things, you still to this day subsidize their entire existence. Free everything, free education. My tax dollars give them a beautiful life while I stay here and struggle. But 150 years? You can't do that? You don't feel like we should go that far back for black people? Given all that we've done to them in this nation? But 2,000 years you can get on board with. 2,000 years. Those people deserve reparations. But the people here at home, overwhelming amounts of proof as to how they are still systemically 150 years ago versus 2000. Come on, Mitch.
I believe that what I said earlier still stands true for not only myself, I would think the vast majority of people. I generally believe that most people want to be civil with each other and want to treat each other with respect. But I ultimately believe that it's this ideology of white supremacy that's done a fantastic job in dividing us as people. They more than understand that it's important to keep people divided so that they can continue doing all their sinister madness behind the scenes, while the majority of the world's people are sitting at the bottom of the food chain begging for scraps. If I was to try and explain white supremacy in layman's terms, or to get the point across to someone who wouldn't understand what it means or had not heard the term, the way that I would explain it to someone is that to think about a dead carcass and imagine that carcass filled with maggots. The maggots would be the white supremacy, and the carcass would represent the world and how it could not survive because white supremacy has killed it, or the effects of humanity because of the maggots or white supremacy. It's like rust on an old classic car. You know, those enthusiasts, you know how important it is to make sure you cut that out and get all of it out, because if you don't, that rust would eventually splinter off into other parts of the vehicle's body, and you got a whole nother problem just a few years down the road. Sort of the same way that cancer affects the body. It's sort of the same way that I see the natives or the indigenous populations of the world. The earth was so pure and natural, and the indigenous people who lived amongst the riverbanks were free of that cancer. I would guess that most people have seen the movies or the series called The Transformers. And I think there is a parallel between white supremacy in that movie as well. If you remember Megatron, he was the evil villain with his crew of Decepticons that were trying to take over the world because they needed the resources in order to assist their populations with survival. And then on the flip side, Optimus Prime, who was the leader of the Autobots, were the defenders and the protectors of humanity and the Earth from Megatron and the Decepticons. Megatron is white supremacy because his goal was to subjugate the population and extract their resources. No different than white supremacy. Oh, and if you can please like the video, subscribe to the channel the exact same way that you subscribe to white supremacy, and I'll be extremely grateful, and I thank you for that.
And what about the civilians of every nation, forced to bear witness and feeling powerless against that trinity that Martin Luther King died fighting: racism, militarism, and poverty? the world is still being held hostage to that same insanity. Held hostage by Western bigotry and a global military empire, which also holds most of our public money hostage. And so what about our children? Held hostage by a world which does not protect them because it worships violence and power and 3,000 billionaires who strip us all of our agency and dignity and our democracy. Held hostage by their money. When are we going to unite in a demand for equality and reparations and basic human rights? When will we demand shalom, salam, peace, which is one word that belongs to all people?
Sadly, I'm going to have to say never, because there's not enough minds around the world that thinks like this gentleman does right here. The poison has already been deep-seated, and it's impossible to turn that around. The way that we live today, underneath this ideology, is the way the world has been designed. For example, think about any board game that you've ever played, like Monopoly or even sports. There has been rules that have been developed to constitute how the game is going to move along. And if you try and tweak those rules because you're upset or you don't like a specific rule, then you're really not playing the game. And we all know that if you're not playing the game the way that it's been designed, then you will be ejected. And I can see this in many areas right here at home. For example, another part of the channel, which is Download Malfunction, the Wig Hat Hunter, I talk about this fascination that African American women have with wearing European style or textured hair. That is a clear example. I don't know if it's subconscious or not, but they are trying to do everything to fit in or be accepted under this filter. You can visit any corner of the world and you will find people denigrating their own culture just to sound or appear more European. I mean, if I was to look at this from a personal or anecdotal perspective, I grew up in an era of jerry curls and S curls and straightening combs. There was an air of apparent that you just couldn't come out into the world as you were designed underneath this white supremacy filter because you just didn't look like the dominant culture, and the world somehow, some way conveyed that message to you.
I think I've been thinking about this wrong. I was under the impression that all this opposition to Black history being taught in school was because they didn't want to have the ugliness of what is American Black history, what is American history about the people who were kidnapped and brought to this country. I was worried they didn't want the ugliness of that to be out in the open, being publicly discussed, because then it would reveal a lot about who they actually are, and it would necessitate some type of repair, and they want to avoid that at all costs to keep the charade going. And I think on one level that's true, and certainly keeping the charade going is the ultimate goal. But whereas I thought it was about the ugliness, I don't actually think they cared that much about the ugliness. Seeing what's happening in watermelon country, seeing how they are indifferent to psychotic levels of suffering and it being visible and public and really, 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 really abhorrent. And they're unbothered, really. They're really not bothered. So that got me to thinking it can't be the hideousness of what they did that they're afraid of or that they're ashamed of. They have no shame. Shame necessitates a conscience, of which they have none, right? So they don't have any shame. It's not shame that's motivating them. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought it's because of how teaching the truth about Black history will inevitably lead you to white supremacy, will inevitably then lead you to capitalism, will inevitably then lead you to colonialism and imperialism, and then the whole structure comes into view. And then you're like, oh, I thought it was just this one piece over here. No, this piece is a very important and foundational part of the structure, but y'all built a whole global structure based on this foundation. And if people start learning about the foundation's true nature, if that knowledge becomes widespread and part of our lexicon and our discourse, and we start to see iconography representing that foundation emerge truly, such that we're not able to keep up the farce, then it threatens the entire structure, because once you can see this piece leads you to that piece, leads you to that, then the whole thing is in view. And that being able to situate white supremacy and its relationship to what's happening in a structure like that is absolutely illuminating. It allows for global solidarity, right? It allows for us to see our entertainment and our consumerism and our education and our politics through this lens.
System malfunction.
I'm trying to take it as high as it go. I've been by the code, you know how I be. I am a product of putting my curses to rest on my family tree. Can see growth. They tell me they free, but they work for the man. I can't relate, I did it on my own. Look how we grow out the concrete to a road.